So over the 12 days, we're working our way through a story called The Adventures of Art, Son of Con. And each day I tell a bit more of the story, and then I use it as a springboard for exploring different aspects of Celtic myth. Now, some people are enjoying not knowing what's going to happen next in the story, and I totally get that. But on the other hand, if all these digressions are making it hard for you to follow the story, or you've missed some episodes, there are links in the description under the video where you can find places to read the story, and you can hear me telling it all the way through. The ways to do that are there. And I really appreciate your donations on Ko-fi. Some people have been donating, but come on, guys. I have to pay for tea and all sorts of things here. And I don't make any money at all directly from YouTube. I don't make any money from ads or anything like that. So this is where we are in the story. Con, the king, has married an otherworldly woman called Vakeva. And she was already in love with Con's son, Art. But Con is the king, and she had little choice. When he asked her to marry him, she had to say yes. When they met, she told Con that her name was Delvkive, the daughter of Morgan. And this marriage has caused all kinds of trouble, because when kings do bad things, their kingdom suffers. However, Con refuses to give the woman up. Now, mysteriously, Bakeva has sent Art on a quest to find Delvkive, the woman she originally claimed to be. And today, he sets off. Now, it was Art who found a beach and cast himself into the sea in a coracle, as Con had done before and Bakeva had done before. Island to island he sailed, seeking Delvkive, but no one had heard of her. Finally, after a long and weary search, Art came to an island fairer than any he had ever seen. It was full of wild apples with beautiful birdsong coming from every bough. Fragrant flowers grew there in abundance, with humming bees, ever beautiful, flying round about them. He came to a house thatched with purple and white wings of birds, and in that house dwelt a host of hospitable women, all young, all beautiful. And the most beautiful of all these women was called Kredja. And she set about doing everything that was needed to welcome Art to that house. She saw that food and drink was set for him, and she offered him a many-colored mantle to wear, which was adorned with gold. Then the lady gave Art 3 kisses and led him to a bower, all carved from crystal, a place of comfort and luxury such as Art had never imagined. It was supplied with cauldrons of inexhaustible food and drink of every kind that Art could desire. So it's worth noting that there is a tendency for these otherworldly women to lay on very lavish hospitality. And perhaps there is an aspect of wishing to ensnare the hero. He loses track of time. He enjoys the company of beautiful women and kind of loses the will to complete his quest. Is there perhaps a hint at this here? We'll have to see what happens tomorrow. Of course, this might be among the many tests of the hero's will and his honor, that while he accepts the hospitality, he doesn't completely lose focus. So wait and see. I love these lush descriptions of otherworldly islands. And my plan today is to give us a break from so much thinking and to wallow a bit in the beauty of some of the best passages I know concerning the otherworld. So on day 1, I talked about classifications of Irish stories. 2 important ones are adventures and voyages. So this story, Art, Son of Con, is an adventure. although it's Art's actual adventure is only just now getting started. Sorry, I'm rearranging my beverages. And it's in the nature of many adventure stories to contain an Imram or voyage episode. So if you love beauty and weirdness, it's hard to beat an Imram, a voyage. In these tales, heroes set out in their ships, usually with a crew, unlike Art. He appears to be traveling alone. They often have no idea where they're going, but it's mostly the journey that counts. On the way, they usually encounter a series of islands, and sometimes the descriptions of the sea itself are also beautiful or frightening or downright strange. So we've already seen Con, Art, and Teg from another story pitching up in kind of similar places that include some of the typical features of the pleasant Otherworld. There are apple trees, beautiful bird song, houses made of crystal, and roofs thatched with colorful birds' wings. The people are usually attractive, very hospitable. There are a lot of women. So I've put together a short tour for us today as we go visiting some of the weird and beautiful places described in myth as the Otherworld. So we've already visited one island with Teg, son of Cian. That was one with the fortresses set aside for the afterlife, with the special one for the Christian kings. But before they reached that place, Teg and his men visit another island, and it goes something like this. They looked at every part of the island, but they found no signs of people at all, only flocks of sheep. These sheep were of enormous size, as big as a large horse, and their wool was scattered everywhere. In one flock, they saw a gigantic ram, bigger than all the others, with 9 horns on him. He charged at the men, butting at them violently. Angered, they began to do battle with the ram, who broke 5 of their shields, killing one of their number. Teg slew the beast with a single spear throw. They stayed on that island for 3 more nights, feasting on the enormous sheep. As they explored further, they found human bones of great size, but no sign of what had become of these giants. They left that place and set out again on the same course they had been traveling. Soon they came to a strange pair of islands inhabited by birds, which were similar to blackbirds, except that they were as large as eagles or cranes, and they were red with green heads, and their eggs were speckled with red and blue. Some of the navigators ate these eggs, and at once they sprouted feathers all over their bodies. So it's always puzzled me in what way these birds are like blackbirds if they're so big and colorful. You'll be guessing by this time that I'm quite fond of livestock, and these sheep are not the only strange ones to be found on a voyage. One of the greatest Imrama is called Voyage of Mildoon's Boat, and you can't beat it for psychedelic imagery, such as sheep who will change color if they jump a fence. They sailed to an island of blackness and whiteness. Dividing it across was a wall of brass. Black sheep were on one side, white on the other. The color changed of any that leapt across. So in a story from the Mabinogion called Peredir, the hero encounters some quite similar sheep. He continued to a river valley, and the edges of the valley were wooded, and on each side of the river were flat meadows. On one side of the river, he could see a flock of white sheep, and on the other side, he could see a flock of black sheep. When one of the white sheep bleated, one of the black sheep would come across and turn white. And when one of the black sheep bleated, one of the white sheep would come across and turn black. At least these sheep are harmless. In another tale, known as the Conception of Mongan, a king called Fiachna voyages to Lochlin, where he engages in a battle. Now, Lochlin technically means somewhere in Scandinavia, but in some myths, it might be Scotland, it might be the Hebrides, it might just be kind of somewhere strange. So things are going well for him until this happens. And 300 warriors fell by Fiachna in the fight, and venomous sheep were let out of the king of Lochlin's tent against them. And on that day, 300 warriors fell by the sheep, and 300 warriors fell on the next day, and 300 on the third day. Well, that was grievous to Fiachna, and he said, "Sad is the journey on which we have come for the purpose of having our people killed by sheep." And then there's a bit in the story where they just find it so embarrassing that they're all being killed by sheep. And as they were thus conversing, they saw a single, tall, warlike man coming toward them. He wore a green cloak of one color and a brooch of white silver in the cloak over his breast, and a satin shirt next to his white skin, a circlet of gold around his hair, and 2 sandals of gold under his feet. And the warrior said, "What reward would thou givest to him who would keep the sheep from thee?" Well, the tall man in the cloak turns out to be Manannán mac Lir, looking to make a bargain with Fiachna about sleeping with Fiachna's wife. So much for all that stuff about sin. Did you notice that the cloak Manannán wears here is described exactly the same way as Beethoven's cloak at the beginning of Art, Son of Con? A green cloak of one color. Of course, Manannán often figures in stories of the Otherworld, especially if the sea's involved. In the short tale known as Clean as Wave, a hero called Kivon of the Curling Locks sets out on a sea voyage with 2 foreign princes. Soon they were among mountainous waves, and they found the boat surrounded by beautiful speckled salmon. They thought it uncanny to find salmon among the high waves, and they were afraid. "If we were on land, we could at least do battle with our foes," said Kivon. "I fear we shall all die." While they were in this peril, suddenly they saw a warrior coming toward them, riding a shining black horse, with its bridle richly decorated with gold. He disappeared under the sea for 9 waves, and on the 10th he broke the surface with his clothing dry. "What reward would you give me to save you from your distress?" asked the rider. "We do not know what reward you seek," they replied. "Only the promise of your friendship for the one who saves you," replied Manannán, for it was he. The sight of salmon at sea or near an island is often a sign of otherworldly activity in these stories. Teig and his men see this too before they land on one of their islands. So the appearance of Manannán mac Lir is also, of course, a forewarning that it's all going to get strange and otherworldly. That's obviously no ordinary horse he's riding. One of the most famous and beautiful Imrama is known as the Voyage of Bran, son of Feval. The story is mostly made up of 2 long sections of the most glorious descriptive poetry. In the first section, an otherworldly woman appears in Bran's court bearing a silver branch. The second is about Bran's encounter with Manannán. Now, I'll just digress for a moment to sort out 3 famous Brans. The Bran in the Voyage of Bran is an Irish king. There's another famous Bran whose story is told in the second branch of the Mabinogi. And he sort of goes on a voyage when he travels to Ireland for a battle, but it's really his men who voyage because this Bran is a giant, and so he just wades across the Irish Sea. And the final Bran is one of Fionn McCool's beloved hunting dogs. If you're enjoying this series, why not take one of my online classes? There's almost always something on offer. Some classes have tiered pay-what-you-can pricing, and there are usually a few scholarships available for the more expensive classes. To get notifications about classes and about scholarships when they're announced, you can go to my website and subscribe to my newsletter, or follow me on my Patreon page. So most of the Voyage of Bran is in verse, and it was expertly translated by Kuno Meyer in the 19th century. However, this passage is a paraphrase by the great Scottish poet and storyteller Robin Williamson. "King Bran in your vessel steering, you think you are sailing over the billows. I in my chariot long faring, behold you rowing over a meadow. Where you pull over ocean clear, King Bran with your skiff of rowers, I in my 2-wheeled chariot steer across a wide plain of flowers." The sea you see as blue. You see white waves where you are rowing, finest fields of verdant hue under my wheels where I am going. Out of the womb of the combing sea, speckled salmon leap from the water. They are my calves, my colored lambs. Unknown to them is man's murder. King Bran sees one chariot rider prancing over plain or ocean. Countless steeds are on its surface, though your eyes cannot see them. Full of disport, full of pleasure, rejoicing in the wine of vigor, among green bushes without sin, men and women are lying together. Your boat scrapes among hill peaks, among the boughs of lofty oaks. Orchards of the ripe fruit are under the bow of your little boat. So Manannán is explaining to Bran how things look to him out on the ocean. I've always found this a bit mind-blowing, the way two entirely different perceptions of reality are described in this passage. Bran and his men in their ship naturally see the ocean, but to Manannán, speaking to the sailors from his chariot, it's countryside. Orchards and flower-filled pastures, people making love in the bushes. And you'll notice that these lovers are also sinless. But I wonder whether the meaning here is different than it is in later texts. This poem is very early, perhaps 8th century, a time when people of the Otherworld were still seen as living without the constraints of Christian morals. There's one other otherworldly voyage, which is extremely important in Celtic mythology. That's a poem from the book of Taliesin, known as the Spoils of Annwfn. It's a mystical poem, and no one fully understands it. Yet the more you study it, the more fascinating it becomes. Many of its lines are references to obscure things in other texts. So it becomes almost like a lifetime's treasure hunt to find out all the things in the Spoils of Annwfn, and you never will. The poem relates in some ways to the story of the other King Bran, the one from Wales. So there are several references to that story in this poem, The Spoils of Annwfn. Also to another story which crosses the Irish-Welsh divide, the story of Culhwch and Olwen. So other people have parsed this poem out much better than I have time to do today. I've put a link in the comments to that, and indeed to where you can find something about all these otherworldly stories. But I wanted to give you a little taste of the Spoils of Annwfn. So the Otherworld, or this location within the Otherworld, is referred to as Caer Sithe, the fortress of the Sidhe, a borrowing from Irish. Either this location has many names in the poem, such as the Meadfeast Fort and the Four-Cornered Fort, or it's describing several different fortresses. The poem tells of a raid by King Arthur in his ship, Prydwen, into Annwfn, the Welsh Otherworld. It appears that he's after treasure, maybe even magical livestock, oh goody, and probably a cauldron. It doesn't go well. Like the Welsh King Bran's expedition to Ireland, only 7 men make it back. So the bard Taliesin is speaking these words. Well prepared was Gwyre's prison in Caer Sithe, throughout the tale of Pwyll and Pryderi. Before him, none went into it, into the heavy grey chain that guards the faithful youth. And before the spoils of Annwfn, sadly he sang, and our poetic prayer shall last until judgment day. 3 shiploads of Prydwen we went into it, save 7, none returned from Caer Sithe. I am fair in fame. My song was heard in the 4-cornered fortress, revolving to the 4 quarters. My first word of the cauldron it was spoken. By the breath of 9 maidens it was kindled. The cauldron of the chief of Annwfn. What is its nature with its dark rim and perils? It will not boil a coward's food. It is not destined. Llwyg's sword of lightning was thrust into it, and in the hand of the leaper, Arthur, it was left. And before the door of hell's gate, lanterns burned. And when we went with Arthur, famed in adversity, save 7, none returned from the mead feast fort. So, as you probably guessed by now, one thing that fascinates me are the connections between Irish and Welsh myth. So if you'd like to join me to explore that in depth, please check out the link to my Irish Brythonic Connections class. So please join me tomorrow to find out more about what happens to Art now that he's finally on his adventures. So bye-bye for now.